What's up, guys? Welcome to the Weightlifting Scoop. We got an exciting episode tonight. I got Zach Huse of Strengthworks here. So, what's going on, Zach?
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, Trav.
Absolutely. So, this has been in the works for a little while, but you're building out your new gym, which is awesome, and we're going to get into that and how that process worked. Really, how we ended out here tonight is you asked a question on your Instagram that got some engagement. So, let's start out with that and have a little fun talking about this question. If you want to give the question, and then we can kind of go back and forth a little bit.
Okay, awesome. Well, the question is, it's more of a scenario. So us as weightlifting coaches, we can kind of have some back and forth about it. But the scenario is you're in a competition, and the circumstances matter here. I didn't clarify any circumstances like the Olympics, nationals, a local meet, or anything like that in the question. But let's say that your athlete is in a meet, right? And snatches, clean and jerks are almost done. The person that you're trying to beat, your opponent, he just did 198 kilos on his third attempt. And then for you to win, you would need to at least clean and jerk 199 kilos. And then, assuming that you hit that, that would give you the win for the competition. The question is for your third attempt, do you move forward with 199 for the win, or do you go for 200 and put 200 on the bar for the win and for, hitting 200? So that's kind of the question. There's been a lot of debate, I would say. So what are your thoughts, Trev? Why don't we kick it off with that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the circumstances matter a ton here. So, this is, you know, the answer for me is the literal, like you take the weight to win. And my assumption here is that this is a competition that is extremely important. So, you know, I think the nuance here is that if this, depending on the level of competition, 200 kilos might be a more important and worthwhile goal to the athlete than 199 kilos and winning the competition. But the higher the stakes of the competition are, right? Like when you look at the world championships and the Olympics and meets like that, weightlifting coaches around the world, they are going to take the exact weight that they need to win, because when you're talking about a world championship or an Olympic championship or something of that nature, you're going to take the exact weight. So if you're on Team USA and you're coaching an athlete at the Olympics or Worlds, then the national team coaches are certainly going to push you to take the lowest number that matters. Now, obviously, there's nuance to that. If it's a lower level competition, the athlete's been chasing 200 for 10 years. This is their last competition and the last thing they'll ever do in weightlifting, and 200 is what really mattered to them. Then maybe 200 is actually more important to them than the level of competition they're at. Um, I always talk to my athletes, especially at meets like nationals, and I say, hey, here's our plan, but I'm going to put on the bar the lightest weight that means something in the snatch and clean jerk, right? We're going to take the weights we need to optimize your placement today, because this is the national championships. And then sometimes at like AO series meets, or, whatever they call it these days, virus series and virus
Right.
finals. Some of those meets we might say, hey, this is an important meet, but we might take specific numbers, that are above what we need, because our goals here, it's a nice to win, but it's not quite like winning the national championship or optimizing placement, right? So, now what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the biggest thing, like you talk about, is the circumstance, right? So, I mean, the circumstance is going to determine a lot. Are you at a local competition, national competition, or world level competition? Obviously, if you're at a local competition, you're most certainly going to put the weight on the bar that, is more meaningful to the athlete, just because, the stakes aren't very high. But the higher the level of competition, the higher the stakes, then you're going to want to put on, like you said, the lowest number that's meaningful, or the lowest number that's going to get you the result that you want. I think that it also comes down to priority. It comes down to, what is your priority in that moment, the win or hitting the number. Sometimes when you're doing those series meets, you know, maybe it's not as important to you to hit gold at, the American Open Series 2 versus, really going for it because that's your opportunity versus being a senior national champion. You know what I mean? I think other things that you have to consider, I think it comes down to this. As someone who's clean and jerked 200 kilos before, um, I can tell you in my mind, there's not really, in terms of degree of difficulty or degree of how hard it feels, or the degree of skill level required, I don't really feel like there's a big difference between 199 and 200. So for me, I think that it's kind of a toss up. Obviously, you don't want to put on 200, then your athlete misses, and then you're like, man, why didn't we take 199? But the in my head, the scenario was more of like, hey, assuming this athlete is in shape for both 199 or 200, it's not like we're reaching for something that they're not capable of. Obviously, then you would take the lower number. But assuming they're in shape for both, which one do you choose? In my opinion, if you can make 199, the degree of difficulty to do 200 is probably, statistically negligible difference. So, I mean, if you could do 199, then you could probably do 200. A lot of people were saying, well, would you rather make 199 and win or miss 200 and not win? And my thought is why is everyone associating a make with 199 and a miss with 200? Why not make 199 and win or make 200 and win? That's totally an option as well. I think the things that come into play here are obviously the shape of your athlete, what they're looking like, the circumstance, how much rest time they have. All of those things are factors that play into it. I think, but the main thing that I think is it comes down to athlete psychology as well. Is this a beginner lifter? Is this someone who's seriously experienced? Is this somebody who you think they're really going to get up for that 200 number? You know what I mean? Like they're going to be really fired up, and it's going to really add like that extra little bit of juice when they walk out on the stage. I mean, I think that the psychology of an athlete is big, or when you put that 200 on, is it going to be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and they're going to fold kind of under that pressure a little bit? So, I mean, I think the degree of difficulty isn't really different. If you can clean jerk 199, you can most certainly clean and jerk 200. Um, it comes down to psychology almost. My preference, me being a lifter and also me being an older lifter who's been around a long time, who maybe doesn't have 10 more years left in lifting, I lean towards, for me, that putting that 200 on the bar, just because for me it would be more meaningful. The goal for me would be to make 200 and win. I don't look at it as like if I make or if I make 199 I win, or if I do 200 then I miss. I'm thinking about one more kilo is not that big of a difference, but when you're talking about making a world team or winning an Olympics or winning a world championship, those things can come into play, and then obviously you have to kind of weigh that. I think another big thing is athlete input. Go and talk to your athlete, ask them their opinion, and say, hey, here's the situation. What would you prefer? What would you like? And then, or how are you feeling? Just whatever. If they're fired up and they just smoked their second attempt and they have one more, maybe they smoke 200. The other scenario is what if they go and they hit 199, and they totally smoke it, and then you're like, wow, why didn't we take 200? Like you absolutely destroyed 199. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would have no regrets if they made 199 strong and won the competition
Absolutely. I mean,
if
that's
it was
true.
a high level
Absolutely.
competition. But I do agree. Some people, a there are certain numbers that are intimidating. So some people could be, somewhat intimidated by 200 kilos. Some people could say 200 kilos is what I've been chasing forever, so 199 doesn't do it for me, right? So the motivation has to be there. The right scenario has to be there. So yeah, absolutely, you have to communicate with your lifter between attempts, explain the situation. Obviously, things are in the back are happening quick, but usually the conversation I'm having at a meet that is extremely meaningful, and those meets are going to be qualifiers for something, the senior national championships or their age group national championships. I let them know if we're in a battle, we are going to take, at this particular meet, we're going to be taking the lightest meaningful weight at each attempt that's reasonable, right? Our opener is probably going to be pretty set in the snatch, but from there, we might take a 4 kilo jump instead of a 5 kilo jump if we need to. We might take a 6 kilo jump if we have to. We might take a 3 kilo jump on the third attempt, right? We want to put ourselves in position to optimize placement, but that is explained in advance that at this particular meet, we are trying to win. Other meets are different, right? You have to improve your total to get better in the long term, and so you have to put heavy weights on the bar. You have to put PRs on the bar in order to make them. So, yeah, I think the situation and the psychology of the lifters definitely plays a role here.
The psychology of the lifter to me is the biggest aspect because in my scenario, in my mind, this person is in shape and capable of doing both 99 and 200. The stakes come into play. That's a big factor, but the biggest thing that's going to determine to me which one you take, assuming that the degree of difficulty is, you know, somewhat identical for both numbers, it really comes down to psychology, what kind of lifter you're dealing with, where their head's at, and all of that. So that's kind of my thought. Everyone's
What
different.
if it is 198 and 200? Like, where do we draw the line,
Like you need 198 for the
Yeah,
win.
yeah.
I think I personally would take 98.
Yeah, what if, so
I
is
think if we're talking
200?
about a 1 kilo swing, it's like
Yeah,
1 kilo.
yeah. I guess it's like, what's the difference between like 199 and 200 and 127 and 128, or like 197 and 198,
Well, see, that's the
I
thing. The
think we
reason.
put, yeah,
Sorry, I
I
didn't
mean,
mean to cut you off.
I think psychologically people do view like these round numbers, even if they shouldn't, right?
Yeah,
They
because
view
it's
them as
just a
being
weight.
more important. Yeah. And there's really no difference than like 201 and 202. Like if we were talking about 201 versus 202, we're taking 201. And
Exactly,
this
but
isn't a conversation, but because it's a round number, people get stuck on it, and they have this long term goal that like
well, it's
200 is
because it's
extremely
because it's a
meaningful.
milestone number to me. It's less about it being a round number. 130 kilos is a round number. 130 kilos isn't a huge milestone. Assuming you're a young up and coming lifter or an older lifter like me, and you've been training your whole career to be able to hit 200 or more at a competition, and you finally get the opportunity. This is the other thing about this. It's like, let's say you're spending all of this money to go to this meet. Let's assume you've trained for years. I mean, in order to accomplish a 200-kilo clean and jerk, you would probably attest to this. I mean, it takes a long time. I've been in the sport for 12, 13 years now. And I mean, it's taking literally the entirety of my career to finally clean and jerk 201 time. In my opinion, it's like, okay, how many more times do I have to clean and jerk 200 kilos in my career? If I have the opportunity to take the win and hit 200, in my mind, the way that I think, I'm not thinking about the risk of like, oh my gosh, what if I miss this? I'm thinking about the moment of I hit this, how amazing, how incredible is it going to be? Everyone's going to be going crazy. I'm going to be going crazy. I'm going to like, it's something I'm going to remember the rest of my life. I'm thinking about that and I'm letting that drive me. But I think that as a coach, you have to take the emotion out of it and you have to put your athlete in a position to be successful. So that's as a coach, you have to do that. Me as an athlete, I'm putting my athlete hat on in that moment, not putting my coach's hat on in that moment. But at the same time, like you were discussing, the difference between 99 and 200 and the difference between 127 and 128, I think that the bigger the numbers get, obviously, the less significant a single kilo is. If you're talking about, a female athlete and we're talking about 69 versus 70 kilos, obviously 1 kilo swing could be a pretty big difference in making or missing the lift. But I think that the heavier the weights get, the less significant a single kilo is.
Yeah, and I think with 199 and 200, like the way that it's loaded, like 200 is tighter, the weight plate goes on the inside. Now, let me add layer to the scenario. So, say this is their second attempt and not their third attempt. Would you take 199 or 200?
I think I would absolutely take 99 because assuming you hit that, then you could go for a PR. Let's say that you've done 200 in training or something, then you could go for a PR on your third attempt. To me, the scenario is like it's the final lift. You have to beat this guy. What number do you put on the bar? You have 30 seconds to make your declaration.
Yeah.
And it's like a toss up, 99, 200. I mean, there's a lot of layers you could add. Was the second attempt really really tough, and you're like having to reach for that 199, and it's really more of a hail mary to get the win, but you want to put it on the bar? Then obviously you would take 99. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting also to me when I looked at the people who voted. Like for example, Hampton Morris, Olivia Reeves, some of the most successful weightlifters in American history, both voted 199. But then you have people like Phil Sabatini, some other great lifters who voted 200. So it's really like really a toss up. I think it depends on your perspective, how young you are in the sport, how many more competitions you think in your mind that you have to be in shape and hit those numbers. If you have 10 more years of lifting ahead of you, then maybe that one moment hitting that one lift isn't very significant. but maybe if it's your first time, you've been training your whole life to hit that, it's a significant moment. Um, if you're an older
Yeah, I mean,
lifter, then it's probably a bigger deal.
I think if you've been training for a really long time and you're finally in shape to hit it, then psychologically that is the number that you need to get your juices flowing. And so the scenario is different, but just in a vacuum, I think 199 is the right lift to take. And I think if this is your second attempt and not third, 99 is definitely the right weight to take because
Definitely,
then
yeah.
you know you have levers to pull. If you need to buy like 5 extra seconds, you can make the 1 kilo change, and then you're taking 200 on your third, right? So you don't want to be taking, you don't want to be stretching it further in and making more changes above 200. So I think the scenario changes a little bit, but that was a good way to start the podcast. I think there's nuance to it. It's not super straightforward. You got to know the situation, the stakes that are at hand, what level of competition, and your athlete and their situation. And, they do deserve some input. I do think that, prior to going to the world championships for those athletes that are in medal contention, like Olivia and Hampton, they're probably hammered in like, hey, we are in a battle, and I'm going to take the exact weight that you need to win or medal, and don't get stuck on numbers, right? Um,
That's what Leo says. He says, always thinking about numbers is like tripping on your own dick.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, like if you go to nationals and you win with less than your PR, you still won national. Nobody can take that away from you, right? And so if you win
Yeah.
the world championships and you didn't hit PRs, you still won the world championship, right? Like I'm not sure, but possibly when Meredith Allwine won worlds, she may not have hit PRs or hit round numbers, right? But she still took the weights that she needed and ended out winning the world champion. And nobody can take that away from her. That is an extremely awesome accomplishment, and it was the right situation presenting itself and making the correct lifts regardless
And then
of the weight.
executing.
But
And then executing.
that moment is only more important than a number because it is the world championships, right? And so that that definitely matters. But anyways, man, like I said, good way to start the podcast. So we want to talk about a few things. You've got a couple of really good athletes, like several, and you've been coaching for a while, and you've got this new building that you now own, which is amazing. So let's kind of talk about your coaching and the process of getting this new building and remodeling it. And I think a lot of people would love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm just thankful that I've been able to work with, the people that I've been able to work with. I'm thankful that, our gym has started from, a really small space, 1,000 square feet with like 10 members. And we've just been slowly over time been able to, bring people in, develop them over time. And, that makes it more meaningful that way than, any other way. But yeah, I mean, I've just been really blessed, really fortunate with awesome people in our building, and they've bought into the way that we do things, and they've really just been all in on the team, and you could see that in the results. You could see that in the camaraderie that everyone has. How close everybody is, and being a part of that's really special. In terms of the acquisition that you're talking about with the real estate, it was a long time in the works. I think that a lot of weightlifting coaches can maybe learn a couple things from my story just because, while I'm still learning, I do think that, I know a lot of people who are up and coming weightlifting coaches, or they're trying to open their own business, their own gym. And while I definitely do not have everything figured out, this is a lot of good information that maybe I wish that I had when I first started. And I had to go and seek that out from mentors, other people who own gyms, other people who own programs. Um, like I remember before I owned my own gym, renting obviously when I first started, I remember calling Will Fleming and asking him for advice on opening a gym and running a gym and all that. So I mean, you're always trying to learn from other people. So if anything, I feel like this would just be a good way to add some value back to other weightlifting coaches who might want to enter that venture. Um, so yeah, what would you like me to do? Just kind of start talking about the beginning, or what would you like?
Yeah, let's talk about your coaching a little bit first, but
Okay.
I think whether you're talking about coaching or owning your building and business and all that kind of stuff, um, I mean, first off, like nobody really has it figured out. You're all kind of learning, so it's great to have a group of folks that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of. But you're certainly doing some amazing things, and I think that people can learn a lot from it. You're right, though. A couple of your athletes. One of the things that I respect about your team is that you've developed some of your athletes from scratch all the way up to the point they are now, which is very close to making senior world team, making junior world teams. Doing very well at all levels in all age groups, and so um, it's awesome when you can inherit or recruit some athletes and they're at that level and you make them incrementally better. But it's really, really cool when you see someone start someone from scratch and keep them for a number of years. And that's rare in this sport in this day and age. Like it has happened over time a little bit, but it's pretty rare. So let's kind of talk through that and the beginnings of your coaching and where some of those athletes started at and ended out at the moment. I mean, they're still super young, so they're continuing to grow.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the kind words. I think that that's always just been our philosophy is having a long term mindset. I think at Strength Works, I really just we pride ourselves on working with people where they're at. So for a lot of people who come in the gym, that's people who have never lifted before, and so over time, you see a lot of different people come in the door, and some people have more talent than others. But as long as you have a good coach, you have a solid program that you're following, and you're getting good feedback, the progression is a little bit faster than if you were on your own per se. But I mean, I have a handful of lifters that we've had a lot of great success with. I think in 2024, I had five athletes make international teams, and from the youth and junior level mainly. We had two athletes on the junior world team and then had a guy on the youth Pan Am team. I had a woman make the FISU Games team in Colombia. And then it was really cool also to just go to the Olympic Games and watch that year. So it was a ton of travel. But uh, now we're starting to try to get some of those junior lifters to transition over to the senior teams, making those senior teams, which from experience is really difficult. The standards are really high. Nowadays, they were a little bit easier to attain, I think, before, but now those minimums are they're extremely high. And they took away two spots on international teams, so it's no longer top 10. You have to be in the top 8, so that's 20% of the opportunity right there out the door that we used to have. So essentially, if you're wanting to make, at least on the female side, if you're wanting to make an international team, then you need to be either an Olympian, an Olympic hopeful, or a world champion, or have been in contention for those, because all those girls are pretty much doing that right now. So, and then on the guys' side, the numbers are pretty high, so you have to be very strong to make that team. Um, and a couple of my athletes by name, I would say I'll start with Ava Biesterfeld. She's one of my best athletes I've ever coached and one of my favorite people I've ever been around in the gym. I always talk about the thing that differentiates her from other people isn't necessarily her talent or how strong she is or anything like that, but it's her champion mindset, not letting anything rattle her and just how tough she is. And then also just, her willingness to listen, her willingness to be coached, and her willingness to just stick with a plan and follow a plan no matter what. But when I started working with her, she had never touched a bar before, so she was brand new. She didn't have even have weightlifting shoes. She was just in Vans, and she started from the very beginning, just how I would coach, anybody in the fundamentals. But she progressed quickly, and her first nationals, I think she snatched 63 kilos, maybe it was, and then she clean and jerked 83 or 84, something like that. So that was her first nationals. That was the one in Vegas. I don't
Okay,
know
yeah,
if you were at that one.
2022,
2022, and
where
then
where they did
now.
the warm up room on the side thing. They tried something
Oh
at, at,
yes,
at, at the
yes,
Nationals in Vegas, and then
yes.
they
They had no curtains.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah,
basically,
yeah.
instead of the warm up room being behind the competition platform, it
They
was
were
beside.
exposed. I
Yeah, yeah,
remember that
yeah.
being a meme.
Which,
Exposed.
yeah. Well,
I
that's
don't know
cool.
if you remember that.
So is Ava from St. Louis?
Yeah, she's from St. Louis. She went to high school here. I mean, she's from here her whole life, but she found me from one of her friends. She used to do gymnastics, which is, I think, pretty common for weightlifters. A lot of the females come from a gymnastics background, weird enough. But yeah, she started with weightlifting with me, and quickly got to the point where she was snatching like 100, 105 kilos, clean and jerking like 125, jerking 130. So she got pretty strong pretty quick, and we got to the point where we were like, all right, every time we go to a meet, our focus is making um, a world team or making the NTP, the national team. So that's been our focus.
Now,
Navigating weight classes has been difficult, but yeah.
so let's back up 1 second. So her first national, she does like 60 something and 80 something in
Hmm.
2022. How long had she been lifting at that point? When did she start with you? Before COVID or
It's
after?
been about 4.5 years. It was after COVID. I think she started with me. You said that was 22.
Yeah, yeah, I believe so. So three nationals ago.
I think she started with me around October of the 2021 maybe.
Okay. Yeah,
So
so
at that
she
point,
had
she
only
had
been
been in the
training
sport. Yeah, she had been in for about 8 months at that point at that nationals.
and she had no prior experience in weightlifting before. Okay,
Zero. Had
interesting.
never touched a bar
So basically, within 4.5 years, she snatches 100 kilos. Like
for a
less than
double.
four and
She
a
did
half.
100 for a double, 105. Yeah, I mean, so she's progressed very quick. I mean, she's definitely the best female athlete I've ever coached. Honestly, probably one of the best athletes in general I've ever coached. But
Yeah, I
she
mean,
is
she
like the
she would
gold
be
standard for sure.
a lot of people's best athlete. I mean, it's still pretty rare to snatch 100. It's become more common than ever. But let me ask you a question. You know, 10 years ago, it'd be super rare for a female athlete to snatch 100. You'd be talking about like Maddie Rogers and Jenny Arthur and outside of supers, right? Of course, you'd have Sarah Robles and others. When you're talking about an athlete of her size, like 69, 70, 75 kilos range,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
77, whatever the weight classes are going to be, um, then that was rare. Like you're talking about a handful of people ever below super snatching 100 until like Jenny Arthur comes about. Now it's pretty common. So, do you think that we're getting more talented people with better athletic backgrounds? Like she has a background in gymnastics, obviously that primes her to do it. Or do you believe there's like this banister effect that like 100 is normal and people expect to do it when they start the sport, and so if they stick with it they just get there easier because mentally they expect that if they reach a certain level they're going to do it, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a few factors. I think the first thing is with the popularity of CrossFit and weightlifting, there's more people doing weightlifting. There's more coaches. There's more programs. There's more people who have access to this stuff than when I started. I remember when I first started weightlifting back in 2013, 2014. It was pretty big to see a girl clean and jerking 100 kilos or triple digits. So I agree with the sentiment that you're saying. And then the other thing is, I think there is an effect of, when you see other girls doing it, that it's possible, and it makes it less significant. So you're able to kind of push to that. Like, it's like, if they can do it, why can't I do it? I think that that's definitely a factor as well. Um, then I think that, weightlifting coaches in general have improved as well. But I think the pool has just also gotten bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that weightlifting methodology is certainly improved. I think there was definitely a handful of good coaches in the past, and there was always
For
a lot
sure.
of them, but you had to geographically live near them and be lucky enough to even run into these people.
It's more
Whereas,
abundant now, I would say.
yeah, or you had to be good enough to get to the national program to go to the OTC. And, even then, I think that people have a better understanding of the sport now than they did back then, regardless of any of that. Because the sport has evolved slightly. So, with nuance, I don't want to say that people didn't know what they were talking about because that's not true. But it was less common. Also, knowledge sharing wasn't a big thing. There really wasn't Instagram and YouTube and all that. And I think
We do
while
live in the information age. You're right.
yeah, and in some ways, a lot of misinformation or like misconstrued information gets out there to the masses. So
Definitely.
occasionally, I feel like some information gets like spun around and given to people, and it's not correct. But I think that overall, the information that people are getting is way better than it was when we first started or I first started.
You could do a whole podcast just on based information versus misinformation. I mean, it's crazy when you go on. I mean, it makes it hard to kind of know what to believe, what not to believe. So you really got to make sure that your source is good. For me personally, my sources in my upbringing as a coach come mainly from my coach, Leo Totten, who's one of the best weightlifting coaches in U.S. history, in my opinion. He has one of the most successful weightlifting teams all time in USA weightlifting. But also just training with other great lifters. I've trained with Olympians, world team members. I've been able to train around other great coaches who have developed all of these other great athletes. So over time, having skin in the game, learning from all these different people and taking ideas and then trying them and then seeing what works, what doesn't work. I think that's been kind of the secret is just always trying to learn and then applying it, and then also being willing to listen to your athletes, make adjustments, all of that. I definitely don't claim to know everything. I'm still learning myself. I think that everyone should be trying to learn. Like from you, me and you have had some conversations. I think that there's a lot that I can learn from you as well. You seem like a really intelligent guy, and you've been around some of the best weightlifting coaches the U.S. has to offer. So there's definitely a lot to learn through relationships with people. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think in the past, one thing that was interesting about weightlifting is that there was a lot of good coaches, but there was also a lot of people within the sport who um, sort of had a mindset that they couldn't learn from anyone, or that they had the answer. I think that that's less common now. I think people understand there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of good information out there. There's a lot of people doing different things, and like I can talk to you about some things you're doing with your athletes, and you can talk to me about things I'm doing with my athletes, and we can kind of say, hey, that's good, I can apply it, or like, hey, that's working for him, but I don't see how I can apply that. And like, it's okay. Nobody's right or wrong necessarily. It's just, you know, it's okay to share information. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to use something someone else is doing and also not. But you don't have to be so married to your methodology that you're like it's the only way that works.
Yeah,
I
but
think
I also think that like when you're talking about a team and like having team success and being able to develop, a lot of different athletes, you could have the best program ever, but be in a terrible environment, terrible training partners or no training partners, and not progress in weightlifting. So I mean, I think that like beyond just following a piece of paper that has the programs, the sets and reps, and all that written on it, the thing that also is really important is like your relationship with your coach. Do you trust your coach? Relationship with your teammates, training partners, overall environment, having fun with the sports. That way you do it for a long period of time. There's a lot of things that go into, being able to push someone to get the most out of their career that they can. I think that goes beyond just the sets and reps. You know what I mean? There's some people that maybe do a terrible program or one that's not very good, but maybe they have a great time weightlifting and they get better just because everything else around them is so awesome. You know what I mean? Just my thoughts.
absolutely. I mean, the psychology plays, to your point earlier, psychology is so much of it and believing that you can do certain things. And I think, one of the things about your team is that it's an in-person environment, right? So you have weightlifters coming in and training together. I train in my garage a lot of times, and I've been in this sport for 21 years now. So I've been doing this forever. I'm as invested as anyone, but it is
Mm-hmm.
really hard on hard days to train by yourself,
It's really
Like I
hard.
I
So hard.
wish that I had. I mean, there are weightlifting teams around me that have great lifters but I work 9 to 5, and so it just doesn't like work, right? So in the life that I've created that has so many things outside of weightlifting that are amazing,
Mm-hmm.
it creates a situation where I can't optimize weightlifting all the time, right?
Yeah.
And those are choices that you make as you get older and want other things out of life besides just weightlifting performance. So, um, but when you're able to train with people, the hard days are easier. Um, in some ways, it's nice to train alone. In some ways, it can be an absolute grind. So there are certainly pros and cons to both. But I think it's cool that, for the most part, what you're creating is an in-person environment where these people get to train together. A lot of them are actually from St. Louis. A lot of what you find now is like there are in-person gyms, but a lot of the top lifters might be from somewhere else and they're just remote athletes and they train somewhere else and
I
they
do
may
have that
not.
as well, but to your point, it's really hard. I mean, I have a guy, his name is Zach. He has made every single junior team for the last 3 years. He didn't go to any last year, even though he made both of them and was funded because of injury. This year, we'll see. But I mean, he's a remote athlete. He lives by himself in Portland, Oregon, and
Hmm.
he trains alone most of the time. And I'm always on him about coming and training with us or just moving to St. Louis. So that way he can be around the team and have that push. And that way I can, push him more together. But I mean, like you said, it's really hard to train alone and remotely. And I definitely noticed a difference as a coach. And I always quote you to some of my athletes. I always say, when you're talking about your 9 to 5, the older you get, weightlifting gets harder to hit those numbers, not because of your age, but because of other responsibilities that pull you away from training as much as you normally would when you were younger, or, being able to invest as much into training and whatnot. So I think that as you get kids like you and me and jobs and own buildings and all this stuff, it just makes it harder and harder to have 5 days a week to go train for 3 hours a time with a team during team hours.
Yeah, and age certainly is a factor, but I mean, there were times when I was younger and I was president of my fraternity one year, lived in a fraternity house, was a full schedule of classes. So I had like all this stress,
Travis, a
right?
frat guy?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh, that's crazy.
yeah, I mean, I had all these like responsibilities and I mean, my training was not good, right? I just had too much stress. Like I had hit a 320 kilo total before, and at that point in time, I was totaling less than 300 kilos, right? Because I just had so much stress.
Yeah.
And nobody's like, when you're 21 years old, nobody's like, oh, it's your age, It's like, wow, this is a lot of stress. And so, I kind of have a similar amount of, probably more stress in my life now, and I'm doing better than I was then. And so I know if I had reduced stress, like I could still hit certain weights, but age is certainly a factor. Like you're not going to be 80 years old, clean jerking 400 pounds. But I do
Well, it's just
think
the older
that,
you get, the more responsibilities you
yeah,
have, like you're
yeah.
saying.
I think if you were in your 40s and had no responsibility, then you could probably do things that people didn't expect. And I think people, when they see certain things or they experience certain things themselves, assume that that's just reality, right? If they themselves got injured and then couldn't train until they were 40, they assume that it's not possible because they haven't seen it or if they haven't seen a lot of people do it. But I think that if someone had the ideal life, they could probably train, 42, 43. There's a certain age that's like much higher than people think at the moment. Now, obviously, it's not 60, it's not 70, but it's higher than what people said that when I was growing up. It's not 30. I think if I had ideal life circumstance, I could have peaked at like 35 or something, So,
That's what
uh,
makes people like Phil Sabatini and gosh, who is the other? Jason Bonnick makes
mm-hmm,
guys who are like 40 years old and hitting like all-time PRs or close to their PRs so crazy. Like for example, Phil Sabatini from East Coast Gold, he's a professor at college. He's got multiple kids, busy family life. He coaches and he's competing and he does music as well. Like he does performance and music and stuff like that. And the question that you get asked is like, how do you balance all that? So that way you're still able to train and compete. But then as you get older, your training also starts to look different. You're not able to necessarily train the same way when you're 30 or 35 years old as you did when you're 20. The volume and the tonnage and the intensity and everything like that changes slightly. So it's difficult to balance everything, but as you get older, you get better at handling everything, and but priorities take a big role in it as well. So
Yeah, kind of back on topic though. I guess your point was, you know, these people who are younger and don't have responsibilities, if you value weightlifting or you have a dream, go chase it. Is that kind of like where you were going with that?
yeah, absolutely, and I mean have a coach who is also hungry for that as well. I think there are coaches who out there who maybe don't necessarily care about that, or they don't care to get into that because they know how much you're gonna have to invest to do that. But yeah, I mean, if you're young and you want to chase a dream and make something happen, you want to also work with somebody who has that same mindset. Another guy who I coach, his name is George Upmeyer, and he's one of my other best lifters I ever coached, and he's actually my first athlete to ever make an international team. I worked very hard with a few athletes before George to make international teams, and they were really close, like one lift away close. And
Mm-hmm.
then they just realized how hard it was, and they quit. They didn't want to. They didn't want to keep going. And George came along. He originally wanted to just train for swimming, kind of get back in weightlifting, like 3 days a week with his buddy. So they went at like 5 a.m. in the morning in my gym and just trained for fun. Um, I saw George when he was younger at a meet. He was coached by a guy named Ben Overcamp, who um, is, a bigger name out here in St. Louis weightlifting. A lot of people know him from like the Lab Gym, Justin
I
Thacker,
know him.
Jeff
Yeah.
Whitmer. Yeah. So he was the guy who originally coached George when he was like really young, like 7, 8, 9 years old. But then he came to me after like 2 years off of weightlifting. He was only totaling like maybe 180. So he was doing like 80 and 100 or something like that. Uh, and I remember just seeing him, and I just kept telling him, I'm like, man, that looks so easy. Why don't we put some weight on the bar? And we finally convinced him to start putting some weight on the bar, and he was just hitting PRs left and right. And then finally, I was like, I wonder what the standard would be, because at the time he was 17 or 18 years old, and I was like, I wonder what the standard would be for him to make a junior national team. So I looked it up, and I was like, man, like, I think this is doable. Like, I think you could really do this. And at the time, he was also doing swimming full time,
Mm-hmm.
like every day at high school. And he would come to the gym tired. And I told him, we had a conversation. This was at the beginning of our journey together for international teams, and I was like, hey, you know, I think that you could really do this. You have the parental support, you have the financial support, you have a great coaching program to be a part of, you have the talent. It's the perfect storm. I think that we could really do something here. But I want you to know that if you decide to do this, it's going to be the hardest thing probably you've ever done, because there's going to be days you want to quit. It's going to be long, hard training sessions. It's going to be painful at times, maybe. And there's going to be times you probably hate me because I'm going to be pushing you. And I want you to really think about it, because if you say yes, you want to do this, then you're not allowed to quit. Because I just had, two or three people quit on me before they accomplished it. And then he came back the next day and he's like, I want to do it. And so we went for it and he made it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So all right, so Ben Overcamp, yeah, that's a name I haven't heard in a while, but he's like an OG in weightlifting. So he was coaching George when he was like 8 years old. I didn't realize that George, but uh, that's what you were saying.
George was actually on the podium at Youth Nationals with Hampton Morris at one point.
But yeah, yeah,
So
that's
George
that's
has been
crazy
around for a
because
while. People don't realize.
okay, but so he was kind of messing around with weightlifting, but doing swimming and some endurance things, and then kind of came to you, and he was hitting about 180 kilo total. And like, what year was this?
This had to have been like around the same time Ava started. I would say sometime in
Oh, is
2021,
that recent? 2021, and he was
maybe
only total
twenty twenty-two.
he was totaling 180, and he's snatching like 160 plus
He
in
was
four
a fre-
years.
he was yeah he was like a sophomore in high school. He was like
Wow.
a
Yeah.
he was like, or no, sophomore or junior in high school, and he was totaling like 180. And he had just come back from not training for a couple years because he had an injury or something. He was playing volleyball, he was doing swimming, he was doing all this stuff. And then eventually I told him, I'm like, look, man, all these other kids who are trying to make these teams aren't doing all these other things. You're going to have to make a decision. It's totally up to you, but you're going to have to decide what it is that you want to do. He decided that he wanted to go all in on weightlifting, and at this point, he had not made a team yet. So it was really just like belief. We felt
Yeah.
like he could do it, and I I encouraged it because I wanted it too. I wanted to see him be successful. I wanted to be there with him when he accomplished that goal, and I knew he could do it. So I pushed him to do it, and his parents backed him up as well. So we went for it, and it was challenging. The first the first Arnold that he did to try and qualify, he opened with his PR snatch. He missed it twice, and then made it on his third, and then he was one jerk away from making the Pan Am team that year. And then when he went to nationals, he hit what he needed to on snatch, and then he bombed on clean and jerk because we had to open with his PR, and so he didn't make the team there. Even though if he would have made his last jerk, he would have made the team. If he would have made any of the jerks, he would have made the team. But and then finals that year, it was the third meet that year, and that's when he finally made it. He totaled 300 at 89 kilos, and this is a guy
Mm-hmm.
who's like 6'2", 6'3". He's a pretty tall guy, so he was like really skinny. But he made
Yeah.
300 at 89, and then they came out with the A standard and B standard, which is like they weren't doing the 81% minimum anymore in the NRS. They switched it
Mm-hmm.
to the A standard and B standard. And then he went to the Arnold, and it was originally supposed to be like an easy meet for him because he just qualified at finals. But then they came out and said, now you have to hit the B standard, which is the minimum, and he had to hit 14 kilos higher.
Okay.
And they didn't
Yeah.
tell us until the day before. Do you remember this at the
Gee,
Arnold?
yeah. I don't remember the specific scenario, but yeah,
They
yeah.
didn't they didn't they didn't put it out there until the day before the Arnold, and I was like, hey, we have to hit a 14 kilo total PR at this meet. And so he did it. I mean, he just kept showing up. So he made the Pan Am team, and then he had to go qualify for Worlds. So he had to compete at Nationals, and he had to hit a 320 total to qualify for Worlds, which was even more. He
Mm-hmm.
did it. He made the list. It was crazy, 140, 180, and then 4 days later he competed at Pan Am's in Colombia. Literally 4 days later.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
it's just
remember that situation where they had that special junior session, and then some people went there and then went to Pan Am's, and he was one of them. I
well
remember
because they
that
had to qualify
vaguely.
and they weren't going to
Yeah,
use Pan Am's as a qualifier.
yeah, because of the timing, which is yeah. There's always weird gotchas in the rules. So yeah,
But he was
that's
my
quite a
first
story.
athlete to make it. He was my first athlete to make it, and it was just like crazy moment. As a coach, you work your whole career to finally get someone to make an international team, and to have the adversity that we battled with other athletes, and then finally have someone break through and make it. It was a really great feeling.
Now with George, he's a lankier guy. He was obviously doing swimming and volleyball and stuff like that. You were talking about like so he has a lot of athletic capability outside of weightlifting. So do you feel like that gave him a good body to get into weightlifting and make progress really quickly when he specialized because he had already like had this well-rounded stuff um, about him plus the background in the movement. I mean, obviously, even though he had never like optimized a snatch and clean and jerk, he had still done snatch and clean and jerk when he was very young. So that has to do something as well. But what do you
Yeah.
think allowed him to make progress quickly? I mean, it's a collection of stuff, but
Well, here's my thoughts. When he came to me, while he did have experience, there were still some things we had to clean up with his technique. I credit Ben Overcamp. He did a great job with all of the athletes that he coached, with teaching the fundamentals. While George was still a young lifter and, 180 kilo total in high school is, pretty low total, but he wasn't really training seriously for a couple years, and, he just hadn't really done it. So for me, the thing that I think helped a lot was when he came in the door, he already understood the snatch and clean and jerk, and he already understood mostly like when we were talking technique, we could speak the same language. You know what I mean? So it accelerated that process from having to learn to just having to refine. And then also it was a big thing was the psychology of it. He needed someone to push him. At the time, he was a little hesitant because of the injury that he suffered a couple of years ago. And, he needed someone to really kind of instill in him that he could do this. He was strong, he was durable, and that's what he needed. So, with the refining and then the push and then just having a structured program approach, I think that helped. The athletic background sure doesn't hurt. I don't know any athlete who has suffered from having, an athletic background and being athletic. I don't know how you define athleticism, but I define it as, the ability to pick up new skills and be coordinated, doing those things quicker than other people. Um, so he had that.
Yeah, I think there's like certain qualities that you need a minimum threshold to be good at weightlifting, like, uh whatever those skills are, like a vertical jump or whatever. Like you need like a minimum amount for yourself. And if you're above that minimum threshold, it doesn't really help you. But once you get below, you need more of it, right? And I think there's certain like general athletic qualities that
Yeah.
that certain athletes, if they specialized early and never swam or never did gymnastics or never did anything else, they wouldn't have these general athletic qualities without doing those other sports.
And that's a
So
big
you,
talking point with coaches, like you're saying, yeah, with specializing
yeah,
too early.
yeah. So there's a point in which like specializing too early is not good. Like I think it's possible if the weightlifting coach is versed in actually developing those athletic qualities. Like I don't think you have to play a certain sport. I just think by playing a certain sport, it's more fun and easy to develop certain qualities.
Hmm.
If it's structured. I think the biggest thing is that if you're playing football or soccer or something like that, like you can get injured, right? And then it would keep you from reaching your potential in weightlifting, but you're going to develop certain qualities. But it is interesting because, like, you wouldn't think that endurance sports have carryover to weightlifting, but you look at somebody like Morgan King. She was like a soccer player that and did running and stuff in the past, and then quickly got really good at weightlifting once she started doing it. And then George, from what you're describing, it sounds like he's doing a lot of sports that require some cardio. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely cardio involved, but soccer and swimming as well. There's still a sprinting and explosive aspect to
oh
those.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you're definitely still getting those attributes. But George, he's extremely athletic. His vertical is very high. It always impresses me when I see him jump and touch the ceiling or whatever. He's just one of those guys. It seems like he could do anything and pick it up pretty quick. I think the big thing for George, he made those teams, the Pan Am team and the World team, and the World team was his last junior meet. Unfortunately, I wish that I was able to get him sooner, but the big thing with him now is transitioning to the senior level, kind of along Ava. He went from snatching like 140, 145, and clean and jerking like 180. Now he has snatched 160, and he's clean and jerking. His clean and jerk is pushing 200. He was close on 195 at finals, and he just missed the jerk slightly. He didn't get his front foot far enough forward, so he wasn't able to really stabilize. But 195 was made for sure if he did that. So going from a 320 total to going to a 360 total, and he missed 164 behind. So
Mm-hmm.
he attempted 164 on his third attempt, missed behind, and the senior standard for him, the B standard, is 369 at 110. So you got to think that if he puts together a 65, 205, or something like that, that's 370. He's right there, trying to make a run for making that China team this year. So that would be amazing. Right now, it looks like he should be able to make the University World Team, which should be in Doha,
Mm-hmm.
Qatar. So really excited for him to have that opportunity, because I know that once he gets on that world stage again, it's going to be awesome. With the numbers that he's hitting nowadays, it's going to be really exciting, and I know that he loves being in that environment. So I'm excited to see that and be there with him for that. And George, the same thing as Ava. I think that when you're talking about athletes who are successful, when you're working with different athletes, you get a lot of different personality types. Some people are, more in their heads than others, but George and Ava seem to be the same. Nothing really ever rattles them. If they have a bad day, they shake it off almost immediately. They move on to the next thing. George is one of those guys where he finds a positive no matter what. Like, he bombed out at at nationals to make his first junior world team, and then he was like, "Well, we'll get that next time, but that was a great time, and I was really close, and yeah, that's great. Let's back to it." I mean, he just nothing phases him. You know, some people would just be totally shattered by that kind of thing happening, and it just seems like he's always on the positive, looking for the silver lining. That's a credit to his parents and his upbringing for sure. I like to think that I have tried to help play a role in his upbringing as a weightlifter, but just to see him go from like youth guy, barely hitting anything, 80 and 100, all the way to 300, 320, making junior teams, and then now hitting 360 total, pushing 370 total. As you know, it's really hard to hit those totals as a senior. The 370s, 360s, and when he competed as a 110, he only weighed 100 that day. So when
Yeah,
he
he's still
he only
growing. I mean,
he only weighed 100.
he's still relatively thin, and so like he's going to be able to put on weight without like he has the ability to gain weight and then put it on his frame. It's not like he's someone who is going to look bad at 110 kilos and he's 100 right now, right? Like he's going to put on good quality muscle and he's going to be lifting a lot more weight, so he's got a lot of potential. Now, with these athletes, you said they have a champion mindset. Like I would imagine when they first came to the gym, like you know Ava's snatch, like her first national, she does like 60s and 80s, which is good lifts, but it's a long road to like 100, 105 snatch and 125 clean and jerk where she is now. Obviously now the proof is in the pudding. You can see, hey, I'm like a few kilos away from the world team. But when did that transition happen? Was there ever times where they lacked confidence or felt like, can I get there? And how did they get past that?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't really think that I've ever seen George or Ava or any of my other international athletes, Henry Ledbrook, who made Youth Pan Ams, medaled at Youth Pan Ams, Zach Noss. I don't really think that I've ever seen them not be confident. I think in order to be successful and to hit those lifts, especially when you're going against Olympic hopefuls, Olympic medalists, world champions, you almost have to be unrattleable. I think that there's definitely been like plateaus where like you get to certain numbers and it seems like it's been really hard to get past those numbers, or technical breakdowns continually happen kind of at the same point. At those times it's been like frustrating where you're like, man, why can't we get past this? Another meet where we weren't able to hit what we wanted to hit. I think that has happened, but I think that the silver line, not the silver line, but the common ground between those two is, they've always been willing to show up again the next day. They've always been willing to show up, and they've always been willing to go back and just get back to the drawing board and start training hard. And then typically, I always tell people that after a good meet, it's hard. It's hardest to bounce back after a good meet, because after a great meet, you're like, oh, okay, I can take a little bit of a break. Things are great. But after a rough meet, you have a rough meet and you're like, you're pissed off and you're like, damn, that was embarrassing. I want to train so hard right now so that way that never happens again. So, I mean, I think for me, just I think the people is the biggest thing. As a coach, you got to work with, who comes in the door. But, I think that we've just been so blessed to have people who are just really emotionally mature and intelligent. They understand the process. They're process driven, and they trust me to kind of say to line up the opportunities and explain to them what they need to do in order to get there. Um, and then it just becomes doing the work and working together as a team. So I mean, I think we've just been really fortunate in that regard with the people that are a part of our team.
Yeah, I think definitely when you have a performance that you don't expect in a bad way, it's easy to lock in, right? It's easy to fix things. Now, if you have a certain personality, now let's transition a little bit. So I think what you're doing with your coaching has kind of pushed you to continue to move to bigger spaces and probably pushed you to buy this building. But let's talk about like from the business side, where you started renting space from another gym, getting your own space, which is really nice, by the way, already. and then saying, hey, I actually want to be in a nice building and buy this thing, you know?
Gosh. Well, there's definitely a lot to say about this process. I'll start with this, and I might just kind of talk for a minute, I guess, because there's a lot to say. But so I apologize. But I mean, when I first started coaching weightlifting, I came to St. Louis and I had zero clients, zero money. It was basically like, how am I going to pay rent? I got to figure this out. I started calling every gym in town saying, hey, can I coach weightlifting at your gym? Luckily I had a couple that said yes and they wanted to work with me. I first started out of another CrossFit gym. So basically, they wanted to expand their CrossFit gym. Me coached the weightlifting program. We were kind of 50-50. Like we would split up the revenue from that 50-50. I would do all of but I had no money to invest at the time. So I did all the work, all the coaching, all the marketing, the client relations, all that. And then they basically, put up the money to do the expansion and they ran the books and all that. That lasted for a couple years. But then we saw things different ways. They wanted to make more money and pay me less, and it just didn't really work out. There was some arguing, some fighting, and that's where I met Trevor Kim. He came to St. Louis, and when that first started, and we trained together every day, and that's where me and him really became, really close, best friends. And then Trevor, he's been with me every time I've opened a new gym. He's helped me open my gym. Unfortunately, he moved to Indy, but yeah, he's been one of my closest friends ever since. Um, and while I was doing that, I wasn't making enough money just coaching people, so I had a side hustle, and my side hustle at the time was, I don't know if you know what Disney pins are, but like you can go to the Disney parks and you can like buy little pins to wear on a lanyard or to trade or whatever. But Disney pin trading was really big at Disney, and when I went there one time with my family, I got kind of sucked into it, and I got addicted to like trading with people and being social. And I kind of have that collector gene in me where I like to collect things, sentimental things. So I started doing that, but then I realized that there were people who were making them. And so from there, I was like, okay, well, these people are making these pins and they're selling out in an instant. And I'm doing the math and looking at how much money these people are making. And I'm like, this seems like something I can do. So I taught myself how to do graphic design work with Adobe Illustrator through like YouTube. I got an iPad and taught myself how to draw and how to like vectorize things and all that. And then I found a manufacturer overseas that did good work, and I built a relationship with them, and I was able to build my own platform, my own private marketplace for my designs. I would do pre-sales, and then I would sell more when they come in to people, and that's kind of what I lived off of. So I was making good money doing that. I was pushing out a ton of designs, and I had a good reputation with that. I did good work, good quality work, and I built that up, and I was making good money. And then I was just kind of letting the weightlifting stuff kind of just build. And then finally, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to open my own place. I'm paying this guy way too much money to use his gym, and I was giving him like $3,500 one month, and I'm like, why am I not just renting a space for like $1,000 a month? It's like I could find a space way cheaper. And that's what I did. So I went and I found 1,000 square foot space, which is really tiny. I mean, 1,000 square foot. I mean, we could fit 6 platforms in there and a bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
That's like it. So that's 1,000 square feet. So I went, I signed a lease, and I remember thinking it was so scary because it was like, oh my gosh, I did a 1 year lease. Because I was like, what if I fail? I ended up investing like 20 grand into that. So between equipment, build out, all that, I think I spent like 20 grand. And I told myself, okay, if I suck and no one wants to train with me and I fail, I can just sell all my equipment and get my money back. So it kind of mitigated the risk for me. So, but that was my first time signing a lease, putting my name on something, and I was like, all right, let's do it, and we did it. And then after a year, I needed a bigger space because we went from 10 members to like maybe 30 or 35 members, and the gym was pretty packed because it was small. There was like 15 people in there at once. So then we went to the gym that we're at now. I signed that lease right before quarantine, like a week before quarantine. So I got a great deal on it. I went to her. She wanted like a market rate. but I lowballed the shit out of her, and I was like, hey, I'll take the space as is. I'll do all the build out. I'll do XYZ, but I'm gonna give you, like $2,500 a month. So, and then she was like, done, shake, because it was like COVID, and she
Mm-hmm.
was like, yeah, I want money coming in. So went there. I signed a 5-year lease, and with an option to terminate after 3. But we ended up staying the whole time. We're still there. We grew the team from like 35 people all the way up to like 100 or so people, plus or minus, just depending on the month. And that's when the team really kind of took off. We went from 1,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet. We had room for 15 platforms and other things. And we were just in a really central location. It was nice. And at the time, that was scary as well because I went from signing a $12,000 value lease to signing a $75,000 value
Mm-hmm.
lease. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I really fail now I'm on the hook for like some serious money. Because when you sign a lease, it doesn't matter if your business fails, you're paying the lease. But luckily, through just like growing and still trying to do a good job with coaching, um, I was able to outlast that space. But the big thing is that I always tell new weightlifting coaches is when I first started this process, I wasn't paying myself with weightlifting. For example, when I first started in that first 1,000 square foot space, 10 members, let's say they're all paying $100 or something like that to start. I mean, that's $1,000 a month. The rent was like $1,100, utilities was a few $100. So I mean, the money that I was making was like breaking even. And if I had to pay my bills, like my house bill and all the stuff off of that, I would have no money to reinvest into the business. So going from that 1,000 square foot space to the 2,500 square foot space, the build out alone was like $10,000. And then you have to buy more platforms, you have to buy more equipment, more bars, more plates, all sorts of things. The money adds up, and if you're not saving that money to invest it, then your business won't be able to grow. So the only reason I think that I was able to be successful in the scaling of my business was because my income was from a side hustle. I was working late nights, like up until 5 a.m. My daughter had just been born. I remember there was nights where my daughter had just been born. She would be laying on my chest on the couch at like 3 a.m. and I'm drawing pin designs with her sleeping on my chest. And I mean, like I was up until like 5 a.m. every single night talking to overseas manufacturers who were like 12 hours ahead of us, doing all this stuff. And for the first like 3 or 4 years of StrengthWorks, I lived off of that. And I didn't take any money from StrengthWorks. I just let it build and then I reinvested it when it was necessary. It wasn't until I got to a point where StrengthWorks had grown to a certain point where it was demanding a certain amount of my time and effort, and I was getting spread too thin with my side hustle that I didn't have enough time to do it all. And I was fortunately making enough money to be able to pay my bills with StrengthWorks. So I stopped my side hustle and I went all in on StrengthWorks. But that didn't happen for like the first like 4 years of owning a gym. So something to keep in mind if you're a weightlifting coach and you're wanting to open your own spot, you need money to invest in your business and you need money to invest in you. Travel isn't cheap, equipment isn't cheap, build out isn't cheap, rent isn't cheap. All those things you have to take into account, and then you got to pay your own bills. So it really helped me to have that income. Maybe you have a spouse or someone who can help you with that and cover the bills while you're growing the business and taking more of a risk. It just depends on your situation. Everybody doesn't have that. I'm fortunate to have a supportive wife where we're able to kind of share in the burden of that stuff while I'm taking these bigger risks. She has a traditional job where she's, gets benefits and all this stuff and able to pass that along to me. I don't have that. So I'm pretty much taking all the risk trying to build this. But in order to do something great, you have to have some sort of risk involved. Any sort of investment you take, no matter what it is going to have some sort of risk. But anyways, I digress. That space, that 2,500 space, I just thought to myself, I had about 100 grand saved up in the bank at the time. And I was like, all right, my lease is up in 2 years. What am I going to do? I don't think I had 100. I think I had maybe like 50 grand saved up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I have 2 years left. And the options really are to rent or to buy. That's it. If you want to continue your gym operation, let's say you want to get a bigger space, which we needed at the time because our gym was, it was busy and we had a lot of people. I was like, okay, I want to expand. I want to be able to offer more services. I want to be able to offer more things, more amenities. So in order to do that, I need a bigger space. So I started the budget really diligently because I knew that in order for me to move to a bigger space, originally I was thinking about renting. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to need like 75,000 bucks for equipment. I'm going to need like, 20 to 50 grand for build out. So I'm going to need, like 100 to 125 grand to like play with to do this when I move. And I knew that my lease was up in 2 years. So I made an Excel sheet, basically a budget where I tracked every single one of my expenses. I tracked monthly everything that was coming in, everything that was going out, and then I could project based on that where I would be at the end of the year, where I would be by a certain date when my lease was up. And if I stayed on that, I call it like making a program, but for your money.
Mm-hmm.
So as a coach, you make programs to get a desired result on a certain date. So you have to do that for your money as well. So that's what I did. And it wasn't until I started looking at all these places to rent that were like 7,000 square foot, 6,000 square foot, and they wanted like 8,500 bucks a month, triple net, which if you don't know what triple net means, that means that you're paying your share of property tax, your share of insurance, your share of, common area maintenance and upkeep, you're paying your utilities. So that 8,500 bucks a month was probably going to be like 11 or 12,000 bucks a month for a space that's maybe just like double the size that I had now. And then also, if you're putting money into a rental, you don't get to take any of that with you. All that money you fix up that space, that's money that's gone. And
And
also like
if things go bad, you're upside down, and then if things go good and you need a bigger space, you got to do the same shit 5 years from now.
again, but
So,
also with the market, if let's say the building value goes up $1 million, right? Let's say it appraises for more than you get none of that. You don't get to
and
eat off of any of
your
that.
rent goes up a lot.
Exactly. And then let's think of it this way as well. When you're assessing risk, right? You have to think to yourself, okay, let's say I go rent this big space, I sign a 5 year lease or a 7 year lease or whatever to get a good deal on the rent. Let's say that after 2 or 3 years, you decide that you don't want to coach anymore, or something happens and you have to close up shop. You're still on the lease. You still have to pay that. To me, that was a huge risk just because you don't know what's going to happen and you just don't know. So originally, like I told you, I went to go talk to other people that I knew, other gym owners who had purchased a building or had been where I want to be. And I asked them, I laid it out for them, people that I trust, not just anybody. And I'm like, hey, this is where I'm at financially. This is how much money I have. This is what I'm thinking. Like, what was your process like? Can you give me any advice? What do you think I should do? And at this point, this was like a year out from my lease being up. And I remember going to talk to one of my friends. His name is Mike Petruso. He owns CrossFit Wildwood, but now it's Wildwood Athletic Complex here in town. And he's a guy who I've known for a while, and I really respect his gym. I love how they do things. And him himself, like I just think that the way that he operates everything, the way he handles everything is great. And he runs a smooth operation with a lot of members, like double as many members as I had or triple. And he bought his building, so he had experience with that, and he's had experience with tenants and all this stuff. So it seemed to me there was a lot to learn from talking to him. So I went and I sat down with him, and I bought him lunch, and or maybe he bought me lunch or something like that. I don't remember, but we talked. I told him, I was like, hey man, I got like 100 grand. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's my plan. At that point, I had a 1 year plan, which was the 1 year to save up what I needed to get to a new space. And then I had a 5 year plan after that, which was to rent a space for 5 more years. Because originally I thought that in order for me to buy a building, doing a conventional loan, you're going to have to put down 20 to 25% of the building's value. So let's say you're buying a building for $1 million, which for $1 million, that doesn't go very far in real estate. Like you're buying a shithole for $1 million. And if you do the math, 25%, that's $250,000. So you're putting down $250,000 and you're financing $750,000, which for me, I was like, dude, I only got 100 grand. I need time to save that money up. So I was going to do a year to get me to that new rental and then 5 years of rental to save up the money to do, to buy a building while I'm scaling up the gym and increasing the revenue. And then he
I
told me, he's
think
like,
I think I think one thing to clarify too that you explained earlier, but that people might lose track of, is that this 100 grand that you had in the bank, you were going to have to use it to build out the new space. So you were essentially going to be starting from scratch
Exactly.
and have 5 years. So it's not like you had 100 grand that was going to continue to build. You were going to go to a new space, have to build it out, buy equipment to fill up that new
So
space,
that
which
money
was
was going
going
to be
to,
gone.
yeah, yeah. So it basically doesn't exist if you go rent somewhere. So,
Exactly.
so
And then you're on the hook and you own nothing, right? And then what happens if your landlord wants you out, or what happens if you get in a dispute with your landlord, or they sue you, or anything could happen. You just have no idea. But I told him what I was doing, and I told him my 1 year plan, my 5 year plan, which was 6 years total. And then after that, my goal was to own a building. And then from owning a building, that's where people generate a lot of wealth. He told me his story, which I'll share to someone just because it might inspire you. His building, he had like 25,000 grand to his name, and he owned a small gym, small CrossFit gym. He saw the building. He was like, I want to buy it. They had it on the market for like 1 million. He went, he negotiated it down to 790 or something like that. So essentially 800 grand, but it was 790 grand. So he went to his wife and he was like, hey, I want to buy this property. It's a nice property. It's got a lot of parking, good building. It had rentable space, so he could rent it out and make money off of it. You know what I mean? And he could have his gym in there. That was the big thing, right? And if you do real estate right with the tenants pay down the debt, and then you get to have your space for free. So that's the
hmm
way to do it, and that's how you make money, because then you have no expense and you're just stacking up money. So he went to his wife and he's like, I want to buy this. We only have 25 grand. And then he was like, how much equity do we have in our house? Because he has kids. I mean, they got a family. And they
hmm
were like, we got 50 grand. So they sold their house and moved in with his mom. And they took that 50 and his 20, and they had 70. And then he took out a line of credit for 9,000 bucks. So he had 79 grand, which was 10% of the value. So when you do an SBA deal, which is a small business authority or association, I don't know what
small
it is.
business association. Yeah.
Yeah. So the SBA, when you're buying for a business use, like you're buying real estate or you're acquiring a business, you only have to put down 10%. You could do, you know, all sorts of different loans. We did a 7A loan, but you only have to put down 10%. So he was able to do that. But then he took all of his money, that 79 grand that he had, he put all of his money in it, and then he was starting over from zero. And that inspired me. I was like, man, like, that guy really went all in on his dream. And then now he told me it was the best decision he ever made. Now his building is worth, like way more money, and he appreciates in value. He has tenants, it's been great. So it inspired me. He told me, he was like, you're in a spot where you could do this now. You don't need to go rent another space. That would be so dumb. You don't need to do that. So he really switched my mentality from renting to buying. And if you think about it, like we were talking about the risks with renting, if you're renting, the risk is high because you just don't know what's going to happen and you're on the lease. If you close up shop, then you're still on the lease. But if you go buy something, let's say you close up shop and you don't want to own a gym anymore, you still own a building that's appreciating and you still own space that you could rent out to somebody and make money off of without having to work. So that really shifted my mindset. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go all in on trying to buy something. So then that's what I started doing. I talked to my commercial broker, and I was like, hey, I want to start looking at buildings to purchase. And I found one that I was going to buy, and it was a shithole. And at the time, what you also have to do is call lenders. So if you don't know, when you're trying to get a loan, the first thing you have to do is establish a relationship with a lender. And you're basically just calling and saying, hey, I want to acquire a commercial building. What kind of money can you give me at what rate? So you're trying to figure out what they're willing to give you. And, it's going to differ based on who you talk to. Some banks are more averse to risk. Some banks like real estate. Some banks don't. So you have to really just call around and say, what here. And then a lot of times the lenders are going to ask you for your financial information, tax returns, collateral that you might have to be able to put down, all that stuff. Luckily, the guy who I talked to, Mike Petruso, he gave me a contact for his lender who did SBA lending. And so I was able to kind of establish that connection right there. And that's one of the reasons why having, relationships with people is so valuable, because he was able to give me, contact to get me going on the journey. But when I first went to that lender, I think that they probably viewed me as more of a risk because I knew nothing. I didn't have
Hmm.
any of the documentation that I needed, cash balance sheets, profit and loss statements, business plan, you know, projections. That's the other thing. When you're doing conventional lending, you have to show that you have the money that you need and you have the income coming in to be able to service the debt and to be able to have the business be above water. When you do an SBA loan, you're able to do a loan based off of projections. So like you can go and you can say, "Hey, here's where my business is now, but I'm projecting that if you do this deal with me in 2 years, I'm going to be able to make this much revenue and whatnot." So it's more attractive to do it that way.
Yeah,
If
so
you're,
to clarify a couple things too, just that we're not going into. So the SBA is the Small Business Administration. I actually work for a bank called Live Oak Bank. That's one of the leading SBA lenders in
Mhm.
the country.
Oh,
But for
nice.
people listening out there, like basically, the SBA is a program that the government backs in order to allow entrepreneurs to pursue their dreams, essentially. And so these are government backed loans. And so as a result, it's a program that the government tries to basically increase the amount of small businesses that start in America.
Yeah,
So they don't lend the money, but they
they
back
guarantee it.
the loan. They guarantee a certain amount of it. So between 75 and 90% of it. So for a 7A loan like you got, the max loan's $5 million, but they're for smaller ones they'll potentially back 85% of the loan
There's
or
also 50/40
75%.
loans. There's 50/40 loans where like you put down 10%, the bank will cover like 50% of it, the government will cover 40% of it. That's a popular option as well. We just went with the 7A option, which I'll get into in a little bit because of my situation at the time. I needed to close quicker, and that's a quicker
Okay.
way to close. But yeah, I mean, I started the process, started calling lenders saying, "Hey, what kind of money are you able to give me based on my financial position? Here's how much money my business makes. Here's, all this stuff." My first lender that I worked with, he really helped show me the way and show me like, "Hey, we need to do a projection sheet. We need to do a cash balance. We need to do a profit and loss. We need to do all this stuff," which I had none of. Business plan, all of it. So his bank probably looked at me as more of a risk because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how that stuff worked. But I found a building. It was worth like 650 grand. It was like 25,000 square feet, which is really big. And it was on like an acre here in St. Louis, which is at the time I thought was big, but it's not very big. And the building was made in 1950, so it was like really old. Needed a ton of work. I mean, it needed a whole new roof. It needed $1 million worth of work. I mean, but we couldn't afford to do all that at once. So the bank was a little hesitant to do the deal for this building because of the building's condition, but we were able to get them to do a deal, approve us. It was going to be like a $1.2 million project after we got all of our construction bids in for everything that we were going to do, like the pretty much the bare minimum. Like, hey, we got to get up to code. We have to be able to operate. What's it going to take to get us in the door, be able to open a gym? And the bare minimum, it was going to be like, 1.2 million bucks, but 650 of that was going to be um, the purchase of the property, and then the rest was going to be construction. And then after I purchased it, I was probably going to have to put in another 500,000 down the road
Mm-hmm.
just to like get the building up. So it was kind of a shithole, but at the time, like when I walked in the door, I was like, this is perfect. I can totally see my gym being here. The price is right. My lender at the time I thought was giving me a good deal. I later learned that I was getting fleeced. They were going to give me prime. So typically, when you're doing, a deal like this, when you're doing a conventional loan, they'll give you like whatever the rate is at the time, 6%, 7%, whatever. But when you're doing, an SBA deal, a lot of times lenders will give you like prime plus 2% or prime plus 3%, whatever it is. So prime is like the prime rate, the what the conventional loan rate would be, and then they add 2% or 3% on top of that. So I was paying pretty high. It was like 10% or something at the time because they were going to give me prime plus three. It was like 10.5%, which is really high. And then also they wanted a ton of collateral. So it was going to be tough. And then I was going to have to put down $120,000 to do that deal, which is 10%. Which, like I told you, that kind of lined up with where my money was at the time, and what I had been saving to do that deal. It wasn't until we got a few months down the road and we were going to close that the building, the environmental inspection did not clear. So they recommended from the phase one inspection that we go to a phase two inspection, which I don't know if you know what phase two inspections are, but it's risky because it's typically like 15 to 25 grand or so to do the inspection. And then if they find any sort of contamination in the soil, and the reason why they had to do this was because what a phase one study does is it tells you about the condition of the area, the condition of the building, if there's any potential environmental issues, if there's any neighboring businesses that maybe had environmental issues that are going to make it hard for you to sell your building. So banks want to do this to cover their ass. They don't want to buy a building that's going to have a lot of issues, and then you're not going to be able to sell it on the back end. Or if you default on your loan, the bank won't be able to sell it on the back end.
Yeah, because
So
they're just going to have a building that's useless to them. So
it's useless, and then it's going to be worthless. So they just wasted all their
yeah,
money. So the phase one failed. We needed to do a phase two, which is basically drilling into the floor to see if there's any contamination, which is a gamble. If they find it and you buy the property, you're liable to clean it up, which could cost $500,000, $1 million more. You just don't know because you don't know how bad the contamination is. Like I said, the building was a shithole, and it was in an industrial area where there was a lot of manufacturing. There was a laundromat, which is really bad for environmental. So we tried to negotiate with the seller. He wasn't willing to negotiate and lessen the cost or to do the phase two himself. So we had to terminate the deal. And at the time, I had like 25 grand on the line because of an earnest deposit and other things. So if we terminated the contract, that essentially meant that I was losing $25,000
mm-hmm.
on the deal. And also my lease was up. Like my lease ended in February. My goal was to be in there in March. So it was right around January or February when this happened. So I went from having a plan to now having no plan and having no lease.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a stressful time because I didn't know what I was going to do. So essentially that really sucked. I remember just like being really upset. I don't remember if I cried or not, but it was bad. I was in a dark spot. And so I was starting from scratch and I had to find something. And at the time in the market, there was nothing. Like when you're trying to buy a building, Travis, and I know I'm just kind of rambling, but I hope this helps one of you guys out there, okay? Anyways, when you're trying to find a spot, you need to consider location, price, the condition of the building, if you're able to negotiate with the seller and get a good deal, if it's going to work for you, if you're going to be able to generate revenue off of it with tenants, there's a lot of things to consider. So when I looked within my budget, which I had been approved for, which is like 1.2 million bucks, and I looked for all that stuff, I couldn't find anything. There was nothing attractive to me at all that was the space I needed or the location or the price. So I started getting a little desperate, and I started looking above my my budget to see if there was any buildings that were more expensive, but maybe they hadn't been able to sell because maybe there was an issue or something that, a problem that no one's been able to solve. And that's essentially what business is you're trying to solve people's problems that they can't solve themselves. So I called tons of brokers trying to go and look at all these buildings. I was even calling buildings that were for lease. And I was like, hey, your building's not for sale, but would you sell it? So I was trying everything. And I finally found one building, which is the building that I bought. And I was like, hey, it was listed for like 2.2 million bucks, which was out of my budget. But I was like, hey, what's going on? This building looks great. It's 3.5 acres. The space is huge. Why is this not sold? What's going on? And the guy told me, he was like, okay, the space has been on sale it's been for sale for about a year and a half. But the problem is we haven't been able to sell it because anyone who comes in here is going to have to put in fire sprinklers. And for a building of that size, fire sprinklers are going to cost like $350,000.
Mm.
So the building was 25 years newer, so 1975, and it's only ever had one owner. And it's 3.5 acres of land. So it's a pretty big commercial property. But they were grandfathered in. They didn't have to do a lot of that stuff because they had been there for so long. And they already had occupancy. So I had the idea because my goal was to have a building that I could have a big enough space for my gym, which the space would be like 12,000 square feet, which is like 5 times the size that I have now. And then I also wanted to have space to rent. So that way I could generate revenue that's coming in and then paying down the mortgage and paying down my expenses. So that way my gym can just stack up money, right? So that's what I wanted. So that means that I'm also going to be a landlord. I'm also going to be a property manager, which, is more of a risk if you don't want to do that work. But for me, it seemed like that was going to be a big payoff for me. So that way, as I increase the revenue of the gym, I'm not also having to spend more on expenses. So it seemed like a pretty smart business move for me if I could make it work. So I had the idea to split the building in half. I went to the broker and I'm like, hey, what if I split the building in half? I take 12,000 square feet, and then the other 11,000 square feet of the building I'll rent out. And the rule is if you're under 12,000 square feet, you don't need sprinklers. So I had the idea to turn the 1 unit building into a 2 unit building, and the guy was like, we've never thought of that before. I ended up being able to negotiate a deal. It was a little challenging because they weren't very responsive. I wasn't buying from a person; I was buying from a corporation, so they
Mm.
weren't very responsive. And they also have a lot of like walls. Like it wasn't just like you're talking to one person; you're talking to like a committee. All these people have to sign off on everything. It's like a pain in the
Yeah,
ass.
yeah, yeah.
So I go to them and they wanted 2.2 originally, and I originally went in there and I was like, I offered them 1.3 and I didn't get a response. And then a week later, I offered them 1.4 and I didn't get a response. And then I went there and offered them 1.5, which is what they said their minimum would be. But my top at the time was 1.2. I had just got approved for 1.2, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get much higher than this, than 1.3, 1.4. So I was kind of shooting in the dark, and they didn't respond. And then finally, I was like, well, what the fuck? You guys said that you would take 1.5, and you haven't responded. And then apparently they weren't getting our offers. I don't know, but I called and got on the phone with the guy, and he told me to resend it, and then they accepted. So they accepted. That meant we were under contract, but they wanted us to close pretty quick. They wanted us to close within 60 days. So typically, when you're buying a building, you get 30 days for due diligence or whatever you negotiate, and then 30 days to close and have financing and whatnot. So we agreed to terms. They wanted me to give them 25,000 bucks down. I gave them 25,000 bucks as a deposit, and then we started the process. And it ended up taking a lot longer than we anticipated. I mean, we started this process in April. We didn't close until August. So that 60 days ended up turning into May, June, July, August, 4 months. So we doubled our time, but we were able to close finally. There was a lot of hoops to jump through with the construction because we were finding a loophole around the fire suppression system. They made it pretty hard on us to get our permits and our construction contracts, permitted. So they made it kind of hard on us, which took a lot of time. But then, once we were able to close, it's the same thing with the SBA. You add in, okay, I bought the building, right? Like, or I'm under contract to buy the building at 1.5, but then you got to add in equipment, you got to add in SBA fees, you got to add in financing fees, you got to add in construction. The construction to get us up to code and to split the building into two is 200,000 bucks. So alone, you're spending 200 grand on construction. Let's say you spend 100 grand on equipment. Let's say you spend another 100 grand on SBA fees and bank fees. Before you know it, your $1.5 million deal turns into like a $2 million deal. So you're like, oh my God, how am I going to afford a $2 million deal? This is where it's important to talk to a bunch of lenders. I was calling lenders left and right. I was like, hey, I'm under contract for this building. I need, to do a deal this size. What rate will you give me? This is my financials. Here's what my business is grossing, in revenue every year. What can we do? And it took me 4 lenders to finally get a yes for this project. So based on all my financials and everything, I had to talk to a bunch of different lenders, and I just got a no. I got a no. I got a no. And then finally I got a yes. So you only need one yes. I found a bank that liked doing real estate deals, and they were going to give us a good deal. They didn't want a ton of collateral, and they were going to do all the financing with only 10% down. And hold on, my phone is going off. Here it is. Sorry about that. My phone alarm was going off. But anyways,
No worries.
I'm sorry that I'm just talking so much, dude. But
No, it's good.
I don't
It's
know.
good stuff. And I mean,
Yeah,
so
but
basically, let's clarify a couple things. So yeah, you went with an SBA 7A because they wanted to close within 60 days, and
yeah,
I mean, pretty much so. So since the government isn't the lender, like basically you go to different banks, but certain banks are willing to take on more risk because the government is backing this loan. And so that's kind of like one of the things that is interesting about an SBA loan is that government backing. And then, some people like they lend them and then they sell it on the secondary market, et cetera. So
the
anyways, you end out
mortgages, you
with
mean?
yeah, the SBA loans, yeah, they can
Yeah,
they
they
can
sell
sell them to
mortgages. Yeah,
other lenders and whatnot,
exactly.
and so they may not keep this loan on the books. So since it's government backed, they might take more risk, sell it on the secondary market. They don't own the loan, but someone else was able to pay something to them, so they got some fee, and then someone's holding on to what is perceived as a more risky loan,
Yeah,
but
well, some
they
banks
did
do like
the
deals better. I
government
mean,
backs it.
this bank likes real estate deals that I found that gave me the yes. They were like, okay, you're essentially buying real estate for your business, and then you need some construction money and some equipment money to get started. And they liked that deal because the building was attractive to them. Like I
Hmm.
went from buying a shithole to buying really nice property with a ton of upside, and it was 3.5 acres, so you could even develop the land as well to build another building down the road. So I mean, the opportunity was just great. I went from being in the pit of despair where I was like, oh my God, my dream just got crushed, to then pivoting really quickly and finding another building where it was like, wait, thank God that actually happened because this opportunity is way better. And sometimes things don't work out and you might think it's the end of the world, but most of the time they don't work out for a reason because something better is coming down the road. And that's
Yes,
what happened for
nut
me.
nudging you in the direction, because basically it feels devastating. You lost like 25,000 like by not
Well, I
being
mean,
able to close, right? And so that's extremely devastating. And then you're like, oh my God, like I just
what am
was
I going to
working really
do?
hard. This was my dream, and now I'm out $25,000. And then
And I
all of a
have nothing.
sudden, yeah, all of a sudden this pops up, which seemed out of your price range. It's something that you wouldn't have searched for unless a deal fell through and nothing else was available, right? You wouldn't have even
I was
considered this
desperate.
building because it's out of your price range. And then
Yeah.
eventually you end out figuring out how to piecemeal it together and get moving.
Yeah, but I mean, I got that one yes. The bank supported me. They seem, and I think another big thing is because I had gone through the process one time before, I knew all the things that the bank was going to ask me. I had all the paperwork. I had all the Excel sheets. I had all the projections. I had all the profit and losses. I had the business plan. It was already done. So literally, I just had to send it to them, and they looked at that as me being prepared. Does that make sense? So it was easier for me to pitch myself and sell myself to them and say, hey, this is our business. If we do this deal, we're going to be able to scale our business, 2x, 3x maybe. Who knows? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
and you knew because of the first deal, you didn't know anything, but you knew what financial statements you needed. You knew how to prepare them. You already had
I
them,
paid to go to
and
school.
you were
That's what someone told me. They were like, you lost 25 grand, but you paid to go to school for that.
yeah, yeah.
Like, so I look at it as like, you just gotta pay to the game sometimes. You know what I mean? You chalk it up to just paying it to the game. That's what I did. It sucked in the moment because you're really feeling it and you feel the weight of that. Like your business, all of your athletes, everything that you want to do in that moment just got crushed. And you're like, what am I going to tell my people? What are we going to do? My lease is up. But it ended up working out. And I was able to extend my lease with my landlord. She let me go month to month for a while. But I mean, essentially, we bought the building in August. We got that one yes from a bank, thankfully. I still had to put down 10%. So instead of me putting down 1.2 million, putting down 120,000, I then had to put down like 200,000. So it got a lot more expensive for me. So then I had to really think about, all right, how am I going to get this money together? I just lost 25 grand. I can't put down 1.2 anymore, or 120 because I just spent 25 grand. What am I going to do? So then you're having to like sell things, you're having to save money, you're having to figure out all this stuff. So I was able to scrape it together at the last minute. Literally the day I was supposed to close, I was $400 short to close in my bank account. So I literally had to go downstairs to my collectible room, grab a couple things, go to a toy store down the road and sell it. And I was like, dude, I need $400. Like, take this, give me $400. And they gave it to me, and then I was able to go to the bank, wire all the money, and close the next day. So I looked at that as like my final test. Like, how bad do you want this? You need to find a way to get $400 today. And my wife was like, "Oh, if you want, I'll just send it to you. I'll spot you." And I was like, "No, I have to challenge
Yeah.
myself and see how bad I want this." So I was like, I have to find $400 somehow today. So I did it. We closed, and now it's just been construction. It's been getting the exterior ready, getting the interior ready. But I mean, because the cost was so high for me, I wasn't able to pay people to do all the stuff that needed to be done. Like the parking lot needs to be redone, potholes everywhere, filling it with concrete, repainting the outside of the whole exterior. Doing all the wiring on the roof and the ceiling, and then painting the ceiling, doing all the flooring, painting the interior, doing all the demolition. That was stuff that I had to do myself because I didn't have money to pay for anyone to do it. And that was very hard. I mean, I was pulling 10, 12-hour days every day. And then there were a lot of projects where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I've never done some of this stuff before. I've built out gyms, but it's not really the same. When you own a commercial property, you have to be able to do everything, because everything needed work in that building. I mean, it needed a lot of work. And fortunately, I have people in my life that are willing to support me and give me guidance or help me, roll their sleeves up, put their boots on, and help me. And we were able to get through it. But I mean, as you know, we talked quite a bit. That was a tough stretch for me from August to December. Luckily, now construction for me, I've done pretty much all the stuff that I can do for the most part. Now that we finally have gotten approved for construction permits, we closed in August, but we didn't get permits until December 15th. So it was
Hmm.
like 4 months of waiting for the municipality to approve our plan, which really sucks because that's just a money drainer. But the construction's rolling now; they're doing their job, and then the goal is to hopefully be in there in February. But and then after that, now I have to find a tenant to take the space and give me revenue, because the plan really only works if I have tenants, generating
Hmm.
revenue for me and eating up the costs. Because just so you guys can have an understanding, and this is maybe the last thing I'll say about this, and then Travis, you can take this over. But when you're buying a commercial property, you're on the books for everything, right? So I mean, mortgage, property taxes, which for my building, property taxes are $60,000 a year. So that's
Hmm.
you writing a check for 60 grand a year to, the county or whatever. Insurance, insurance for a building like this is 20 to 25,000 bucks a year. So do the math there. And then you have common area maintenance, you have landscaping, you have snow removal, you have salting, you have to fix things up. I got to redo the parking lot because the parking lot's got potholes all over it. That's 100,000 bucks. You have to fix something with a garage door, or you have to put a new door in. That's 1,000 bucks. It's just everywhere needs stuff. If you need any sort of plumbing, any sort of electricity work anywhere, 50 grand, whatever. And then the mortgage itself, you're looking at some buildings, in a big spot building the mortgage can range from 10 to 20 grand a month. So you add all that up, and before you know it, you're looking at 200, 300, $400,000 a year just to own the building.
Hmm.
So if you own a building, in order to break even, you got to pay 300,000 bucks
Hmm.
just to break even. That's not making any money. So you really have to run your numbers. You have to have a good team around you. Luckily, fortunately for me, we have great athletes at our gym that support our business. My family supports me, my mom and dad. They've been there for me the whole time. My wife, you know, and then also, when you have kids, you got to be really strategic because when you do a deal like this, you're putting your kids on the line too. A lot of times these banks, for collateral, you got to put your house up for collateral or the equipment for your business. I mean, so you really got to be strategic, run your numbers, and you have to make sure that, okay, if I do XYZ steps, I'm projecting that 2 years down the road, the business is going to be here. If we have a tenant coming in, they're going to be paying X amount of money. You have to have good brokers behind you, good architect behind you, good contractors behind you, all these people to help make this stuff happen. So you really have to have a good team behind you. And then you have to be able to roll with the punches. And if some shit happens that you're just like, oh my God, what are we going to do? You have to make sure that the world's not ending for you and you're able to stay calm and composed and find a solution. And this process has been such a long process for me. But the goal is 5 years down the road, I'm patting myself on the back saying, good job, Zach. We're in a great spot. And then the risk that we were talking about with the rental space, if I wanted to close up shop and not own a gym anymore in 5 years, not saying that's the case, then I'll own a whole building. I can rent out the whole building.
Yeah,
Rent
yeah.
out I can rent out the parking lot. I can build a new building in the unused land. And then before you know it, you don't have to work. You just have income coming in as long as it covers the expenses of the building. I mean, and then beyond that, the goal is to, after 3 years, you can refinance from an SBA loan to a conventional loan, which the rate would go from, prime plus two for me. It would go to whatever the conventional loan rate is. Right now, it's like 6% or 6.5%. So
Hmm.
it would cut my monthly payments down by like $4,000. So
Yeah,
that's the
when
goal.
you're talking about big numbers, yeah, it's a big difference when you have like 2% lower interest rate.
Yeah.
That's a
So
big
you can
deal.
so after 3 years you can refinance and go to a conventional loan versus an SBA loan, and then you decrease your expenses by $4,000. That's essentially you making $4,000 more a month. So imagine your boss goes to you and is like, "Hey, I'm going to give you $4,000 a month raise, but you don't have to do anything different." That's what that is. So it's a huge thing to get to that, but I got to survive 3 years first. You know what I mean? I got to survive 3 years. But
Yeah,
that's in a
definitely.
nutshell how we got there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's awesome. I mean, obviously there's still a lot of risk and there's always things like when you're in a process like this, something is going to go wrong. Like it never goes perfectly,
So many
like you're
things have
saying. It's
gone
like
wrong, man.
and
Oh
when
my
you're dealing
god.
with like when you were sitting over the offers and you're talking about, well, a corporation owned it, so they have committees and things move super slow and they have to approve it through this committee, that committee. I mean, it's the same thing when you're dealing with the government, right? And so when you're talking about permits, it's like they're they're never like you're not the top priority rarely,
They
and
don't
so
care about you.
yeah,
They don't care about you.
they're not trying to push you through at
You're
hyper
trying to
speed.
figure it out and like,
So
hurry, I need your help. And they're like, I
you
don't
have
care.
this ideal timeline, and then obviously every month you get pushed back. You're having to pay rent on your month to month lease at your current gym, and so
Exactly.
there's you definitely have to roll with the punches and understand that it's expensive, but you can, if you get to the other side, there's so much opportunity, like
Yeah.
you described.
When it's all said and done, I wanted to be out of my current space by like the end of October, so we could be operating. But I mean, here we are in January, and we're still balls deep in construction. I mean, at the end of this, I'll probably be spending like an extra $20,000 that I didn't plan on spending just in rent for the space that I'm currently in. So then you're
Yeah.
paying two spots. You know what I mean? You're paying for two spaces, and that's what's really draining because you have no tenant, you're under construction. So in the new building you just bought, you're not even operating. You can't scale your business. You can't offer more services, so your revenue isn't going up, and you're spending in two spots. So, but to be honest with you, that's why planning is so important because I planned for that. I planned that there was going to be a construction period. I planned there was going to be a period that I didn't have a tenant. I planned that there was going to be a transition period. So I literally, when I was making my projections, I projected my money out through 2030, like through the next, 5 years, 6 years. And I was like, okay, this is how much money is going to be coming out. This is the period I'm going to have where I'm not going to be doing this or that. So you have to really just like, you really have to crunch your numbers over and over and over again. And then they're changing all the time because something happens or a date changes or a cost changes. And then you're always rerunning the numbers to make sure something works. But I mean, this project, don't get me wrong, this project was a huge risk because um, it was so expensive for me at the time. For other people, this might not have been as expensive, but for me, this was like beyond the top of my budget. You know what I mean? I really had to scrape it together, but my bank believed in me. But now that we closed and we're doing this, it was really a race against the clock. All right, we need all of these things to go right for us to make this work. Um, so it's really just about you have to believe in yourself. I remember the day before I closed, I called my contractor and my broker, but I called my contractor. His name's Ron, and he's a straight shooter. He's like a cool grandpa, mustache, always tucked in shirt, like really prepared for everything. I was like, Ron, am I crazy for doing this, man? Like, am I making a huge mistake? Tell me now before I close. And he was like, you know what? The only people who get anywhere in life are the people who have the balls to take risks. And he said some other stuff too, but it was essentially boiled down to that. And he was like, "You're not crazy. If you want to do something in life, the people who are successful, they take risks and they make things happen." And he told me that, and that stuck with me. And I was like, "All right, I gotta do this." every new stage for my owning or renting a space and then renting a bigger space and then rent or looking at buying a space and then actually buying a space. Every new stage has been scary. There hasn't been a stage that you're going to the next stage that's not scary. It's like for you, it's like having no kids and then going to one kid was scary. And then it was going to two kids was scary. And then, every new stage is scary, but over time, you learn how to deal with things and roll with the punches and you get better with things. So yeah, I know that I just talked a long time. I'm sorry, America, or the weightlifting scoop, whoever's watching this video. I feel like I have been talking forever, but this is information that I did not have when I started this process. And I really feel like, that I'm hoping that it could even help one person. Then it was worth me wasting Travis's night and, just having him listen to me talk. But
Well, I mean, all this stuff is absolutely stuff that interests me as well. I think it's a cool story. And I mean, also another talking point is that at any step of the way, you could have found reasons to say no or stop. Like, oh man, like I can't afford $2,500 for this rent for this new spot, right? I mean, you could convince yourself of that at the time. So it's like the lens you view things from. Like, of course you can fail. Of course something can go wrong. But like when you're renting $1,000 a month, like you can find reasons to not get out of the CrossFit space and not rent that first space because it's too small or like you can't afford it or whatever the reason. Or you can look through it at a lens of this is my first step towards my dream. And when you're going to the next step, it's like, wow, like this is a big risk, like $75,000 a year if it doesn't work out. Like you can convince yourself it's just too much risk and not do it, or you can view it through the lens of like, yes, it's a big risk, but this is what I want. This is what I was brought to earth to do. Like I want to do this. And every step along the way, like you continue to like kind of push the limits and and yes, like when the deal falls through, you probably did cry. I would have cried. Shit. I mean, that's devastating, right?
I just
You
remember I was
so
with Ava. It was like our Christmas party, and I just remember going to her because she's a big part of our team.
mhm.
She's a big part of what we do, and I remember looking at her and telling her I was like, we lost the building, and she knew how much it meant because she's really invested in our program. And I just remember giving her a hug. I don't remember if I cried or not, but I was just like, I felt like a failure. I just felt like I failed. I was like, I don't know what we're going to do now because we went from having this dream, it was going to be amazing, to having nothing. And it was gone. And I didn't know how we were going to move forward because it seemed so perfect at the time. But I come to realize now that that was actually a bad opportunity.
Yeah.
Like once I got into that building, there was going to be so much more that I probably was going to find. And it was just such in rough shape. And then also, it seemed like it was going to be harder to sell because of how hard it was for me to buy it. And the rate that I was getting and the collateral that the other bank wanted was so high. We were getting fleeced. I mean, but I didn't know it at
Mhm.
the time because I had no experience. And so in a lot of ways, it was a good thing that it happened. And I think it was just an opportunity for me to show kind of who I am, which is when things don't go right. The first thing I try to do is find a way to move forward, find a way to find the next thing, find the way to solve a problem. And that's all you really can do because at the end of the day, like you got kids counting on you to put food on the table to provide for them. You got a wife counting on you. She's like, you have to find a way to do this for the family. You know what I mean? And you see some of those memes now. It's like you see it on Instagram when your wife says, "I'm proud of you," and then it goes to Linkin Park songs playing and like sharks
Yeah.
and bears
Bears
and like
fighting. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like you have to like have that in your head. Like when shit goes wrong, you have to think like, okay, I have to figure this out, and then you have to have all that stuff going off in your head all the time because that's what being a business owner is. And you can't let that ever go away. That feeling, I call it the butthole pucker,
Yeah.
where you're just like, oh, I got to figure it out.
And I mean, in a sense, if you can, you get through to a certain point, you have this building, you can always sell it. But as you found, like this building was sitting on the market for a long time and didn't sell. However, you've done a lot of improvements to it and will
Well, we
over the
fixed
next
it.
few years. Yeah.
We fixed
So
it because they weren't able to sell it because they needed sprinklers. But because
yeah.
we're
So
splitting the
because you
building
split
into
it.
one unit to two units, we don't need that anymore. So it makes the building more attractive. And then when we go to sell it, we should be able to sell it for more than they were asking for.
Now, are you because you split it, or would you potentially be able to sell half of the building as its own separate entity, or no? It's like the whole property needs to go at the same time.
I mean, I don't know how that works with splitting property and whatnot, but the way that here, I'll show you a picture of it so you can see. I'll show you on the live. America, you're about to see. America. Here we go. All right. People can't see my address from here, but basically, here's the property. So
Yep.
there's the building, and then you have a big parking lot that fits like 130 cars, and then you have all this. It's like an
Yep.
acre's worth of land right here that you could just build another building on or whatever. You know what I mean? So to
Mm.
me, the reason why it was attractive, not just you're not just buying the building that you're going to be in or that you're going to rent, you're buying the potential to also build another building. And let's say that you go, it's like $100 to $120 a square foot if you wanted to build. So let's say you want to build a $10,000 building, $10,000 or 10,000 square foot building
Yeah,
times
square foot. Gotcha.
$100 a square foot. That's $1 million, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to build a new building, it's going to be $1 million. Let's say with clearing out the land, clearing out the trees, leveling everything, let's say it's going to be $1.5 million. Let's just throw a number out there, $1.5 million. And let's say instead of doing an SBA route, you're going to actually have enough money to go a conventional loan route and get a better rate, and you're going to have to put down more money. So now, let's say it's $1.5 million. Let's say you put down 25%. So 25% of 1.5 million dollars is 375 grand. So let's say you put that down, and then the rest you're gonna finance. So 1.5 million dollars times 0.75, you're gonna finance 1.1 million dollars. At an interest rate of 6% or whatever it is right now, you're probably looking at spending $7,000 or $8,000 a month in mortgage. You know, $7,000, $8,000 a month in mortgage, maybe $6,000, $7,000, $6,000 a month in mortgage. And let's say that you can rent that space out now. Let's say you're going to rent it out for $15 or $20 a square foot. But let's just say $15 a square foot. Let's say $15 a square foot just to be conservative. It's probably more like 20 because it's a brand new space. But what you really do if you're smart is you find a tenant before you build the building, and then you build the building to the tenant specifications. So before you even build it, you already have someone locked in on the lease. That's what you do if you're smart. And I learned that from YouTube, by the way. But anyways, $15 times $10,000 a square foot, that's 150 grand. You divide that by 12 months, that's 12.5 in base rent. So you're paying six, seven, and then you're getting 12.5, and then they also have to pay triple net. So they got to pay the property tax, they got to pay the insurance, they got to pay the whatever, and they're paying 100% of that because they're paying for the space. So they're covering all of that. You don't have to pay anything, but you're making 6 grand a month just by owning the building. So literally, you doing nothing but managing the property, brand new property. You put down all that money, you're making another $6,000 a month, $10,000 a month, whatever. So to me, the property was attractive because of that opportunity down the road, where it's like, okay, I can make money from a tenant in my building. I could make money from a parking lot like outdoor storage or whatever, and then I could build and then own another asset and then make money off of that. So to me, the numbers made sense. That's why it was like, all right, I believe in this vision. It's above my budget. I have to find a way because I just think that this is a great opportunity. So,
Yeah, and it comes
yeah.
down to like side hustle. So you used to do the pins, but now your side hustle is like, renting out the other side of the building, potentially in the future building a new
Not
building and all.
potentially. I have to. Well, yeah, potentially with
Well,
the new
well,
building,
yeah,
but
yeah. I mean, you
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
have
yeah,
to rent
yeah.
out the other side of the building, but
Definitely,
but with
definitely.
the other building, I mean, that's long term. That's not an immediate thing. You gotta
Hmm.
kind of like calibrate, get things started. So it all takes time, and
Yeah.
it may be faster or slower. Your vision was 5 years for this to buy a building, but you ended up doing it in a year. So I mean, you never know. Like things can go faster or slower, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunity, and I think like yeah, the right piece of land. So if someone comes, they want to open up a gym. Like obviously, you went from renting out space at a CrossFit gym all the way to now you're going to be operating out of a large building that you own. Now, you had a couple pieces of advice along the way, which was, you have a side hustle and you didn't expect to necessarily make money at first from your weightlifting coaching because you
Hmm.
wanted to reinvest what you made from that business back into it. What other pieces of advice would you give?
For like someone who's trying to maybe mirror my path, I mean, I would say this. I would say, the first and foremost thing is your supporting cast, your team. And I don't mean like your athletes. I mean like, I have been so fortunate in my life to have parents who support me, who, if shit were to hit the fans, you know, they they have the means to help me if I so need it, but they haven't had to. But I've fortunately been able to kind of grow things and make my own money. But they've supported me, they've supported my dreams, and they've always just reiterated to me that you know they think that my ideas are good because they think that I'm business averse, but they're people who are like, we'll find a way. They don't think of all the bad things that could go wrong. They think of all the good things that could go right, and then they're all in and they're supportive. And I've been really blessed to have that. Not everybody does, but I do, so I'm fortunate for that. And they also give me great advice when I need it, and they console me when shit hits the fan. And then my wife as well. My wife, she's been there the whole ride. College all the way to now when I had nothing, all the way to now owning a $2 million building. So having that, and then kids, and then but in order to do this, you need good brokers, good commercial brokers that are going to be there and help you. You need good contractors who aren't going to steal your money. You know, and then you got to have a good team. You got to have a good business, people a part of your business to help you make money who want to invest in that dream and see themselves being a part of that. And that takes time. It takes a lot of hard work. So I would say that if I ask my uncle who owns a couple restaurants in Indy, he would say it takes twice as long and costs twice as much as you think it's gonna. And that rings true as well. And then I think that beyond that, you just have to have like an undeniable, unstoppable, unrattleable belief in yourself to be able to just find a way and figure it out. And I see a lot of times, people post memes where it's like owning a business or taking a big risk is like jumping out of a plane and then finding a way to fly on the way down. Something to that nature. Not exactly that, but I mean, that's really what it is. Like every time I've taken a new step, I didn't feel ready. And I didn't feel like, I was ready to do those things. And I was kind of like, oh shit, like, am I ready for this? Can I do this? How am I going to make this work? And there's always been a new aspect of something that I've had to learn along the way to make it work. This has obviously been the biggest transition because in order to do a deal of this magnitude, there's a lot on the line. Real life money that can, really sink or swim. So, I mean, I think that, just being willing to believe in yourself always, no matter what, having that champion mindset like George and Ava, and Henry's gonna be mad if I don't mention him as well. Uh, you got to have that champion mindset no matter what. When things hit the fan, you got to find a way and be positive and not let things crush you. And then just have good friends that are there for you to help support you. Luckily, I've had that, so I'm thankful for that. But I mean, those are my biggest things. If you're wanting to buy a building, call around, ask tons of lenders because you can compete with different lenders. Ask them for, try to get the best deal you can. You know, always be looking for opportunities. And it's like the van thing. It's like if you're looking for an orange van or like a red van, you just see more red vans. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with opportunities. If you're looking for opportunities, opportunities become abundant. You know what I mean? If you're always looking for things going wrong or negativity, then that stuff becomes abundant. So just always be looking for opportunity, always be looking for things to go right, and thinking about how you can be a part of things or things can help you get where you want to be. And yeah, those are my biggest pieces of advice, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Life is a lot. a lot of life and the satisfaction you get out of it is the lens that you're viewing it through, and a lot of things that you just said there make
Hmm.
a lot of sense. It's like bad things are always going to happen and good things are always going to happen. And if you're focused on the bad things, more bad things are going to happen, or at least your perception that more bad things are going to happen because you're like, oh, that happened, this happened, this happened.
Exactly.
It always happens to me. Bad things are happening to everyone, and the people who just continue to kind of bounce back and really view life through the lens of looking for the good things and the positives, and kind of like what are the good things that are happening, and how can I move on from this and bounce back instead of focus on. So I like that. Where can people find you if they want to support you?
If you want to support me, obviously, we have a gym called StrengthWorks, and hopefully soon we will be having a huge grand opening, and it's going to be amazing. And Travis is going to fly out first class, and he's going to lift and hit a 200-kilo clean and jerk, and it's going to be amazing. Um, in all seriousness, though, I do want to have a big grand opening, and try and do, an invite some people. And I've had an idea to kind of have like half the building that is unused. People like stay at the building and like comp
Oh,
everyone's
that's
hotels,
yeah.
and then people just pay for their flight and they stay at the building, and then the other half will just be the gym. But I mean, you can find us StrengthWorks. We're in St. Louis here, but soon we'll be launching FitWorks, which is small group fitness classes. We have FuelWorks, which is nutrition and performance, and that's with Ava Biesterfeld, who we've talked about tonight. And then we also have StrengthWorks Youth Program, which is dealing with our youth. If you want to look at me directly on Instagram, Adventures of Zach. My name is Zach Huse, and you could take a look at my lifting and things that I do in my daily life and whatnot. If you want to follow along the construction process, because people have been making fun of me lately, Travis, I'll have you know, because I post a lot of stories on Instagram, but I'm just trying to keep everyone up to date on the construction. So if you want to follow along the construction, I post daily videos on everything that's going on. Just follow us on Instagram, and you could see all the progress. But it's going to be awesome, and I'm really excited. But yeah, just dream your dream, whatever you want to do. You know, I asked myself when I was young, what would I do if money didn't exist? And the answer was be in the gym all the time because I'm a meathead just like you probably. And I love working hard and training, and it felt like something I could control. I could control the results I got based on how hard I worked, and I really liked that. I liked how I could control that part of my life when everything else was out of control. So I did that, and I just scaled up slowly over time. Believe in yourself, go all in, find supporting cast who want to be a part of it and believe in you and are there for you. And no matter what happens, just keep going. That's my best advice. Travis, thanks for having me on your show, man. You're the man, and you're a guy that I really look up to, man. You got a lot going on, and I appreciate you giving me your Saturday night to talk to America, the people of America.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I think, on a much, much smaller scale in a different way, like I've always thought of, build the things that you wish that you had when you were coming up in the sport, right? And so for me, that was like, I hosted weightlifting meets in a brewery and tried to make them like high quality, or even the meets that I host now, I try to make them high quality. So many people are doing things like that now when nobody was doing it before. And all the local meets, honestly, like local meets are like as nice as national meets were when I first started. So like
Yeah,
people don't understand how spoiled they are in the sport compared to like some of the OGs, right? we used to go to a local meet, one of the first ones we'd show up and there was two pieces of plywood, one on one side of the room, one on the other, and then they would have like weights on the floor and a men's bar and one women's bar, and you would just like warm up on a piece of plywood, right? Like there was no
my
like
God.
calibrated scale. There was no like we have 6 warm-up platforms for a competition platform. Like it was just an underground sport. And
What
so,
was your first nationals?
my first nationals was like 2006. So I mean, there's people who were lifting in the 70s, but the sport was just so small, right? It's just totally different. Like the things that people complain about now about national meets are so interesting because they're so inconsequential compared to the issues that we had, at national meets in the past, like in 2005 to 2010 era. You would have
My
some
first
really
nationals was 2014 in
it,
Dallas.
2014 was
No, 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 no. 2015.
2015. Yeah, 2015.
2015. The 94A session was crazy.
Yeah, so in 2013 was at the skating rink. And so in 2014
Mm-hmm.
Phil Andrews took over. So basically someone did a poor job with being the meet director, and they used to bid out the meet directing, so it wasn't the NGB that did it, right? USA Weightlifting didn't host the meets. So Phil Andrews became the person who was like hosting all the competitions now. He was like I don't know what his title was, but it was like competition director or
He
something.
wasn't the CEO yet.
Yeah, yeah. So he was like competition director, and he hosted the nationals in 2014 in Salt Lake City. It was at this bougie hotel. It was freaking beautiful. We had never seen anything like it. So we went from the skating rink to that. It was like super upscale. Yeah, that's a different podcast. Maybe I can convince Phil to do another one, even though he's moved on from weightlifting. But,
I love Phil, man. He's always fun to talk to because he just is so knowledgeable about things.
so I think for you, on a different level, like now you're building this gym, you probably wish when you were first coming up in the sport that this gym existed, right? And so you've been able to build this gym that you wish that you could have trained at as a young athlete and provide that for the next generation of lifters and yourself, right? So,
You know what's funny that you say that is someone asked me the other day at my gym, they were like, why did you start doing this or whatever? And as you know, weightlifting coaches don't get into coaching weightlifting to make $1 million. I mean, it's not, it's a labor of love. You know what I mean? You have to love the sport and be passionate about it. But I told them, I was like, this really just started. I wanted somewhere to train that I wanted to train at, like somewhere cool that I thought would be awesome to train at, where my training buddies like Trevor and other people, like we could go and it would be awesome. And that's what it started at. And then I was like, okay, if I could make a little bit of money on the side doing that as well, then that'd be cool too. But I just wanted somewhere that I wanted to train, like you said, something that you wished that you had, that you just created it. You know what I mean?
yeah, exactly. So, anyways, I think that that's a good way for people to think out there, even if it's not weightlifting, right? Like if you have another hobby that's obscure that isn't weightlifting, like try to build something or create something that you wish that you had that would have helped you along your journey. Um, so, anyways, with that, my name is Travis Cooper. You can find me at Travis Cooper 77kg on Instagram. I hope you guys found value in this podcast. I think we talked about business ownership. We debated if you should put 199 or 200 on the bar.
200, baby.
We talked about opening up your mindset. Just more talented people coming in, as well as people seeing and opening their minds to what's possible. So, if you would like to see any folks, particularly on the podcast, let me know. If you would like to be on the podcast, reach out. And if you have any questions or topics that we can cover, hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.